Alright guys, welcome back to the introduction series. Today we're going to be introducing another new elite specialization, the final light armor. I guess since we did Chrono already and we did Reaper already, let's do another. I'm back on my original main, the character I spent oh so long playing, especially during the Heart of Thorns days. That's my Elementalist. Today we're looking at the elite specialization, Tempest. So, released with Heart of Thorns, this was one of the more interesting new elite specs in that it was gearing itself to a very specific playstyle, and that being that of a support. And the idea of being a support wasn't something Guild Wars until Heart of Thorns had really truly encouraged very well. A lot of the mechanisms for healing particularly, but also boon splashing and stuff your allies, were limited. Then when HOT came out, the devs took certain professions and said, hey, we want you to have really good support possibilities. The Druid, for example, for the medium armor class was one. The Elementalist as a light armor was certainly one of the others. There's actually a lot of places where you can feel as this series goes along, you'll see support capabilities. But yeah, so it's an elite specialization I've spoken at length about in the past. I, in particular, did an almost 2-hour, I think it was, long review of the flavor of this elite spec and how it tries to utilize its flavor. And I've been very negative in the past. I won't go on a 2-hour long discussion here, so let's just sum it up at the start. The Tempest is an idea of a violent, windy storm. It kind of conjures to mind, I think, if you're going with a windy, stormy-based elite specialization, of a DPS role, of something that should hit really hard. And indeed, when Heart of Thorns came out, the Tempest was in that position. If you were an Elementalist, it was better to turn into a Tempest so you could do your big damage. But despite the flavor idea and the idea of overloading and executing these big shouts and whatnot, which we'll get to in a second, the spec is actually designed to be more support-oriented and heal-oriented and boon-oriented. So if you can't get over that and you don't really like that, you might not enjoy Tempest too much. Particularly now that Path of Fire, another expansion, is out and a new elite specialization, the Weaver, came with it. The devs have really allowed Weaver to be in that damage role and Tempest to be in that support role. So yeah, that's what I'll say on that topic, and that's really what we'll be dealing with. But it has capabilities, like all other elite specializations, to be very comfortable in open world scenarios for PvE, for doing story in PvE, and there are various other niches that Tempest can, you know, afford you across the game. In general, I actually really like Tempest for its balance right now. It's close to being one of the best supports in PvP, though it's outshone by another elite specialization from Path of Fire as I make this video, but slowly over time, it's looking better and better by comparison, and, you know, I have a lot of fun with it, even in raids. It's got some great heal potential builds out there, really good for carrying weak groups. I'll also say that if I'm just playing an Elementalist, running around on my own, say out here in the jungle or whatever, Tempest is my go-to choice. I think the Tempest is the easiest, like, self-sustaining, damage-oriented build you can play. I think that there are certain Tempest variants that are way more fun and comfortable and relaxing to play in open world than any Weaver or Core Ellie variant, seriously. And that's because of its access to auras and high boon uptime and sustain. So we'll talk about that in a second. But yeah, that's kind of the place of Tempest. That's where it is. Let's you know, that's where it's actually viable right now. And let's dive on into what was introduced with Heart of Thorns. So first of all, we have the armor piece. What I'm currently in, again, every episode of this, I'm showing you Heart of Thorns related stuff. So I'm on an Asura, so the gear looks kind of rubbish and it's kind of hard to see and, you know, it's not the best. But I'm on Laystone armor, but the shoulder piece is the Tempest shoulder piece. This is called the Tempest Loop. This is what you'll build up as you unlock the specialization on your first time through on the account. So that's nice. You also have the weapon, which I'm wielding here. Tempest get access to Warhorn, which, you know, they blow into to provide largely supportive effects. And this is their special Warhorn. It's called the North Wind. It doesn't have any kind of crazy particle effects and stuff on it, which means that it's a bit more subdued compared to a lot of the elite specialization weapons. But I still really enjoy it. I like the icon it has for what it's worth in the inventory too. And, you know, I often skin this on wherever I can. My main hand is the legendary Scepter Meteorologicus, which is very stormy, and I've always enjoyed on Tempest. The rune, I think, actually tells a bit of the story of the Tempest. As you can see, it isn't allocated to any specific stat set they've just gone with all stats. I think they did that with Weaver as well, and I think that comes down to the developers struggling to find and solidify an identity for Elementalists, considering they always have 4 attunements geared towards 4 different kind of things statistically each time. So it's just all stats. They give you condition duration, which really has nothing related to Tempest at all. If anything, you'd expect to see that on Weaver more. And then also heal allies when you stun break. The T6, that special idea, is actually a fun thing that does speak to the flavor of Tempest. Tempest has an elite specialization that no matter what utilities or traits you pick, you always have a lot of stun breaks on the build, at least 4. And it's a Healy kind of thing in a lot of ways, so having a heal on stun break, that's a cool idea. I've never really seen this be used on any builds though, mainly because of the strength of the T6 itself. I don't think the heal is high enough, and certainly not on Tempest builds. But hey, maybe I'm missing something out there. Maybe Rune of the Tempest has been fun on some weird Berserker builds that self-stun and then Outrage or whatever, I don't know, over the past. But yeah, so this is not a rune set you really think about or interact with in many, if any, ways throughout the years. The T6 is interesting, but all the other stuff drags it down because it has no real strong identity. The thing needs a revamp, really. So there you go. That's the 4 items to do with Tempest. Now let's get into its main mechanics. So when you first unlock it, to have a look here at our build panel, we get the first minor called Singularity. Attain elemental singularity by remaining in an attunement for a period of time. Upon attaining Singularity, you may overload the attunement to your vicinity, and you also gain access to shouts. So Tempest gets shouts, and they also get overloads. That was very verbose, and there's lots of phrases and weird things written there that I really don't think have to be or should have been, to be honest. But what we can do is describe this through action. So right now I'm attuned to fire. If I swap to a new attunement, say water, just like a regular Elementalist, our water skills become available. But you'll notice that I can actually double cast water attunement now. It charges into a new skill, which I only get available if I've spent a while in water. When Tempest was originally released, the charge up for these overloads was actually taking a long time. And, you know, they had really prominent effects. I mean, the effects are still pretty goddamn prominent, to tell you the truth. But now they charge pretty quickly. They felt that the flow of the class didn't really work too well, so a lot of stuff's very accessible. But basically, this is your stun break. So now, while in water, I have my 5 water skills. I got my auto, my 3, my 4, my 5, and I have a 6th skill called Overload Water. And so when I press it, you'll see we get this really big, beautiful animation of a long cast time ability. So all the overloads take a really long time to cast, but all of the overloads while casting are doing things and have big end effects. If you saw my recent video on the Chronomancer with its wells, you can imagine like each overload as being a bit like a Chronomancer well, except they're very strong. So this water one is we go up into this bubble of water, we float around, and while we are in this bubble, we're healing around us, we're condition cleansing around us, and then eventually it explodes for a massive heal. You can actually see how huge this tooltip is. The description is create a surge of accumulated water magic, healing and cleansing allies. When the cast ends, heal the area and apply regeneration. Using this skill causes the attunement to have a longer recharge. So it's got a ton of stuff on the tooltip, and much of this will be revealed through traits. But basically, that's what you have to understand. This is like a stun break for us. Now, if I go to air, we get a totally different one. The overloads are amazing and one of my most favorite things about Tempest. They all look gorgeous. I remember as Heart of Thorns was coming out and the devs were showing us all these new skills, just how incredibly impressed I was by how much work they'd put into the Elementalist animations. Even Efficacy OI, I think they're a treat to behold. So this is Overload Air. What we're going to do is raise our hand up, and anyone near us right now would be getting struck with lightning while it casts. And when it finally casts, it creates this huge field around us that will then also strike loads of bolts of lightning around us too. So to really demonstrate this, I should probably find an enemy for Overload Air. So hey, these Pocket Raptors, this is a great demonstration here. What we'll do is strike 5 targets around us. Also, when the cast finishes, we splash out this other weird effect called Static Charge to all of our allies, which means that our allies deliver an extra lightning bolt on their first attack. It's kind of like a venom for a thief. You kind of get a very mini thief venom whenever you finish this. So here, I will show you fighting these Pocket Raptors. As we're casting, they're getting struck with lightning, 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 and then when it finishes, it's this huge field that's doing loads of lightning over and over and over again, and in that one skill, we get to destroy them all. Overload Air has been a mainstay of DPS Tempest variants where they've been, you know, most relevant. Core Elementalists get the option to instantly refresh Air attunement, so you can, like, Overload Air, leave, and then come back in instantly, and Overload Air again as soon as possible, and come back in instantly and do it again. So that's always a fun synergy when you think about Air. So yeah, that's Overload Air. Next we have Overload Earth. And you notice each overload is kind of themed to the idea of the attunement. Water was about healing and a massive heal when the water bubble explodes and healing around us and cleansing. Air has been about big damage. Well, Earth is about kind of sustain and tankiness. So ride your stored Earth magic around, granting protection to other allies you move over and crippling enemies. Then deliver a final immobilizing blast of power to the area, leaving behind Dust Cyclone that delivers the same effect as the overload. Using this skill causes the attunement to recharge, have a longer recharge. So here, I'll show you. I mean, look at how beautiful this is. People couldn't see this without thinking of like Avatar and being, you know, an earthbender. It's so fantastic. Overload Earth, basically just you're very, very, very tanky. You're crippling and incapacitating people. Yes, you get these little dust cyclones, though that isn't a prominent part of the skill, to be perfectly honest. But you'll notice here we get a ton of stability while we're riding this Earth as well. So that's really the main thing about this, that you're not going to be getting CC'd. Particularly when we look at some of the traits, you'll see how much you can kind of turbocharge that element of the overloads as well. So, yeah, that's very cool. And then finally, we have Overload Fire, which, like Air, is a lot about damage. So, unleash all flames you've accumulated, searing enemies and strengthening allies. Finishing this cast leaves a tornado behind, and using this skill causes the attunement to have a longer recharge. So, what do? We become a fire tornado, spinning around, doing big damage in this area around us, stacking might, and then once we end, the tornado persists. Just like the airfield persists, and just like you get a little bit of persisting cyclones on the Earth. So the idea really is you do always want to finish these casts. They're prominent enough to be feeling like you have an impact while you're casting them, and then the end effects tend to be very good. And that's kind of your main mechanic. That's the big change. It doesn't change your attunements themselves. It doesn't give you a new attunement. It doesn't remove attunements. These were all speculations we had before Tempest was finally unveiled and exactly how it would work. Instead, it gives us these overloads. 4 new stun-breaking skills that you can use in various situations. And traits augment them a lot, as I said. So that's that. Also, though, we get access to shouts and the new weapon, the Warhorn Proficiency. So, Warhorn, obviously, on an Elementalist, though it's an offhand, it's not just 2 skills. It's actually 8 skills, because you get 2 skills per attunement, which means this part of the video will take a bit longer than, say, when we were on Chrono. But it shouldn't be too bad. I really, really adore the Warhorn skills. Often I feel like when I'm making builds, they get crowded out a little bit because focus is so powerful in like the more competitive modes because of its invuln uptime and other stronger mitigation. But it's a really fantastic skill that even to this day, you still get significant buffs. There were big buffs for this just a couple of months before I'm making this video. So let's start off with fire. Again, Tempest is kind of supposed to be supporty. So the fire for, as we have a look here, is called Heat Sink. Give stacks of might to yourself and then spread boons you have to allies. And what it means by that is spread the might out. So, if I fire overload and stand in, which is giving might to me and my allies, and I stand in it, it will give me by the end 10 might. And if now I take this 10 might and I cast Heat Sink next to this guy here, I'll give him all of my might. So in one button, I've just granted that guy 12 might. And the same situation for Fury. If I had Fury on me, which can be pretty easy to get, that, you know, if you're fire specialized, you get Fury on every blast, and we could have easily just blasted that field, we would pump out Fury. So what's really prominent about this skill these days, and wasn't true during Heart of Thorns, but is now, this actually goes to 10 targets. So you can just stack a ton of might on, you know, if you press this button when you have 25 might, you've given out 250 might in a single button press across 10 allies around you, right? Like, it's really, really huge. So I adore this skill. I just wish that I found more application for it. And, you know, quite often this idea of an LE might sharer has been crowded out by other better might sharers, but it's a fun part of Warhorn. Next, you also have Wildfire. So this is basically just a DPS skill where you're going to drop a big fire field down, and it will tick damage around anything that's standing in it, and you can blast in that for might and fury, which you then perhaps share out with your heatsink. So wildfire, one big part of playing like a damagey Tempest is having a wildfire AoE field down in an air overload AoE field down while other skills are going at the same time, so you just get millions of packets of damage, because this actually lasts quite a long time. It's not major damage on it, and it's not major burning on it, but it lasts ages. And if you trait it to be longer, it can obviously go up even further. Next, we have water. So these skills I really like. I think in a lot of ways they're underappreciated by the community. First of all, we have Tidal Surge. So very healy, very supportive. It's a big splash heal that is also a knockback. So here's how it looks. We splash out in front of us. For a long time when Tempest existed, that actually moved a lot slower. They sped the animation up massively. When it moved slower, you could do really fun things because the knockback was on a delay. And the knockback didn't actually have anything to do with the tidal wave animation. It only mattered where you were standing. So you could cast a tidal wave and then like walk behind your target. And when the tidal wave hit them from here, they'd be thrown back into it because it's away from you at all times. You could do fun stuff like that and manipulate people's positioning. You'll notice that this applies regeneration, which means if you are water attunement, you can start getting cleansers out of it, and that's always important to note. But yeah, so Tidal Surge, just a bit of CC on there and a good heal. And then we also have Water Globe. So this you might think of as Water Globe. That's Overload Water. The Water Globe is Warhorn 5, and just like with the fire skill, it cascades an ability out in front of you. This is a moving water field, which was kind of a novelty as Heart of Thorns was coming out. So you can run along in that and, say, blasting it with your Phoenix or whatever if you're in Scepter main hand as it's moving. And you can cast that as people are on the run or whatnot. I actually think that could move a little bit faster. Might be a bit cooler and a bit more interesting. But yeah, that's a moving water field for you that you can try and get whatever combos out of that you like. So that's water. Next we have air. So air attunement, we have the Cyclone. I love the name of this skill. There's so much like, and bear in mind that that is not the same as Dust Devil, which is the 3 on Scepter for Corelli. We got Cyclone. So now, again, because we're going to be in air, we're going to be dealing with big damage, right? First of all, though, there's some CC on the 4 again. Blast out a Cyclone that pulls enemies towards its location and grants swiftness to all allies of effects. So nice swiftness access for you. Though you get swiftness from all your overloads, by the way. We'll look at it in a trait, so this isn't too relevant. But it's basically a zipper, guys. It runs out, and it just grabs everyone and sucks them together. A bit like a less controllable, more cascading temporal curtain that the Mesmers get on their focus, if you guys know Mesmer skills. But it can hit a lot of targets. So if you're in a big world versus world scenario or whatever, it's actually not too bad. And yeah, a bit of swiftness, a little bit of damage. Because this is a CC as well, it has like some synergy with lightning rods, which you might be running. And, you know, you can conjure lightning strikes on people as they're in the Cyclone. Kind of a fun idea. Next is the Lightning Orbs. So this is a returning skill name from Guild Wars 1, where I think it wasn't an elite, but it was a really renewable skill. Launch an orb of lightning that fires projectiles at nearby foes. So if I just cast this on my own here, you'll see, again, it's a thing that comes out in a long line, and it looks really intimidating, I guess. Very cool, like a layered animation. But what did it actually do? Well, the idea of the orb is the orb itself isn't necessarily the be-all and end-all. It's that enemies near the orb get lightning striked with it. Imagine like a Tesla coil kind of situation, you know? Or what are those toys, those like balls that you touch and the lightning zaps out towards you? That's the idea of this. So if I send my lightning orb towards these pocket raptors here, you'll see it sends sparks off to the side, you see? And it kills this. And it will do that to multiple enemies in an area. If you cast it against one target, I think all of the projectiles will go on that one target. So it's more damage single target if you're fighting just one person. But if there's a whole group, maybe it's less. I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, so that's air attunement. And finally, I'm just realizing now that these pocket raptors are supposedly eating this dead warthog here. And so finally, we have earth. Earth is really cool. It's a lot like fire in terms of its really interesting support capacity. So first we get Sand Squall. This does a ton of things. So get ready. Apply protection to you and your allies. Then, increase the duration of all the boons that are currently existing on us and our allies. And give myself magnetic aura. So, and it's a blast. So, this is just what it looks like. Very simple. Least interesting animation of them all. But this is a really badass skill to use in terms of, like, extending boons everyone already has. So, if I give myself stability with the Overload Earth, it's a very short duration stability. You can see there, it only lasts 5 seconds. But if I Overload Earth and then Sand Squall afterwards, I can just chunk on another 2 seconds directly onto that. If I have just a tiny bit of quickness on me, I can Sand Squall to lengthen it. So one of the sigils in the game is called a Sigil of Agility. It means when you attunement swap, you gain yourself quickness, but only for a tiny period of time. So if you deliberately get yourself in combat, swap to Earth, and then Sand Squall, you can have like much longer quickness on yourself that the class really wouldn't have otherwise had access to. And you can do things like heat sinking on all your allies and then sand squalling and extending the duration. You can take basically a ton of boons that are already on people and make them last a lot longer. I really like Sand Squall, and a lot of skills kind of have this effect. The Signet of Inspiration for Mesmer nowadays actually has a very similar effect. So that's nice. Next, you have, and finally, for the Warhorn, you have Dust Storm. So summon a Dust Storm that inflicts conditions. This is a blind. You'll note it's called Dust Storm. When you're in Earth for Glyph of Storms, you get Sand Storm, which is slightly different. But they're both pulsing AoEs that deliver blinds and bleeds. They both do the same thing in that sense. But this one's on your Warhorn, not bound to a utility skill. And, you know, you can turtle in that a little bit. And you can even do a bit of Condi pressure with it, to be perfectly honest. So I can list the skills out for you. The actual flow of using Warhorn and whatnot, you have to kind of get a feel for later. But when you're roaming around in PvE, a lot of it actually is just relying on dropping lightning orbs and wildfires, and then overloading while you're in the middle of it, and then going back into air and doing whatever you can. So you just get loads of packets of damage rolling out a lot of the time. And Warhorn, generally, it feels pretty good, and it is a weapon of choice for me if I'm running around doing kind of regular gameplay and regular content. So yes, let's now look at, I guess, the utility skills, which are shouts. And you'll notice a bit of a theme here. We're using a Warhorn to make a lot of noise, and we're doing shouts to make a lot of noise. The idea is we're like a storm caller, right? Like, we shout over the power of the storm. The flavor and the theme of this is honestly really cool. I very much enjoy. So, shouts, once again, are really more about the support angle than anything else. And what you'll find here is auras as well. So we do have one aura already we showed off on Sand Squall. And auras are filtered throughout the Elementalist class. Most weapon sets have got an aura somewhere. The only one that doesn't is Scepter. And, you know, they gave us one here. Well, the idea of shouts is as you scream your shouts out, you provide auras with them too. So nearly all of the shouts give an aura somewhere. And by giving auras, that unlocks like a lot of other parts of Buildcraft. Like, for example, this video so far you've seen I've been on Zephyr's Boon. Which is grant Fury and Swiftness whenever I do an aura. So that means if I use my shout here, we haven't even talked about what it does, but it's going to give me Fury and Swiftness, yeah? And that means that's one of the fun things about Tempest. Here on Earth, you could see auras give you protection. And these kinds of synergies are really important and valuable to think about when you are a Tempest. Generally, if you ever hear about an Auramancer in Guild Wars 2, or you like the idea of being an Auramancer if you played something similar in other games, flavor-wise at least, Tempest is where you're looking for it. They're the best Auramancers, and they get a ton of stuff that can proc off of them. So, onto the shouts themselves. First of all, we have a heal. Wash the pain away. Let me untrait shouts here so that you guys get the pure idea of these. So, mists billow out of the player, healing allies that are in range. So, here's how it looks. And you'll notice it spreads out and out and out and out. And the way that this heals is actually tied to the animation. So, if I'm hugging you, if I'm right next to this Priory Historian and I cast the heal, they get a really big heal. Because they get the full cascade of water all over them. And every single time this cascades out a bit more, they get a bigger heal. So there's actually 3 different heals. The first one that's really close to you is really big. The second one a bit further away is a bit smaller. But if you're close to them, you get both. And then the third one's even less, but, you know, it's still all right. It's an entirely AoE heal. Most heals in Guild Wars 2 are like, they have a selfish portion where it's just for the user. And then they have selfless portions where it splashes out a little bit. So like if you think about a ranger with his heal trap, right? He always has that selfish bit at the start that he's reimbursed. Tempest has no selfish part whatsoever. The entire heal is balanced around the idea of using it in AoE scenarios. And for that reason, it's extremely strong in selfless situations, but a little bit less in selfish. So let's kill this guy. So here's a little example of maybe using overloads and stuff. This is what my instinct tells me to do on this weapon set. We're going to earth overload, and while the earth overload's rolling, we're going to use the lightning orb, and then we'll use the 5 on the fire, and he just kind of melts down because he's got too many fields on him, right? You'll notice I gave myself a ton of boons there, which we'll get into in a second. So yeah, that's kind of the big thing with this heal. It's one of my favorite heals in the entire game, especially playing on support specs. Some of you guys might... When Guild Wars 2 was coming out, the devs talked a lot about how they didn't like tab targeting healing, that it felt too much like whack-a-mole or whatever. And that's why you don't ever really see that they do it. And I gotta say, their idea of like walking up to people and using specific heals is really, really well executed in the Tempest. Playing a support and actually running over and trying to get the actual max value and then leaving again, it just feels good. It feels really satisfying. And you know, the faster you move and the better you move and the better you figure out where exactly your ally is going to, the more value you get out of it. It's not that great if you're not very close to someone, but it's really good if you are, and it's just a brilliant skill. Next, we have Feel the Burn. So, shout, heat waves, blast out from the player, causing damage and granting fire aura to allies. So, the shout component itself, the damage is alright. It's kind of like a really big version of the heal in that it cascades out. Each time it cascades, it's like ticking at different... So I think you can double tick people with this. If they're running away from you through the Feel the Burn, and they're essentially riding the wave of fire that you've just cast out, I think you can hit people multiple times, I think. But really, the main value of this is that it's instant activation. There's no cast time on this whatsoever. So while in a fire tornado, I can throw out a Feel the Burn. Yeah? And so the boon range I get from it is kind of massive. It's also given me a fire aura, which itself has its own advantages, hopefully you know about from core Elementalist, and it applies a tiny little bit of burning. The tiny bit of burning on there is almost, in truth, in competitive scenarios, I think that the fact that that has a little bit of burn on there is actually a nerf to the skill. Because never have I experienced a Condi build that can utilize Feel the Burn for condition damage pressure. You'd always use something else, like Signet of Fire. And that tiny packet of burn getting thrown out means that like firebrands and necromancers can convert it into Aegis for themselves and make themselves more defensive. So I actually think that that's not a good part of the skill, but flavor-wise, I get why it's there. Yeah, very simple skill. This is your most spammable shout. If you're going for maximum value off of auras and stuff, it's a really good choice, even though it doesn't have much of an effect outside of giving that aura. Because it's instant activation, it comes up so quick, you get a lot of value out of it over a long engagement. So nice skill. Next is a very potent one, Flash Freeze. Flash Freeze, unleash a torrent of ice on enemy locations, chilling those who cannot escape, and grant Frost Aura to allies in range. So those of you who saw my video on Reaper might remember that Reaper got shouts with Heart of Thorns, and the Reaper Elite shout was basically this. This is like the non-elite version of what Reapers have. So we don't stun or anything like that. Instead, we put out Frost Aura. So I'll show you what this looks like. We have to be near an enemy for this one. This guy's running along. And I cast Flash Freeze, and you see all these little ice packets around. That's like fireflies and things that I hit with it. And basically, we put a little bit of chill out. So chill is not a bad condition whatsoever. In PvE, you don't think about it too much, but the fact that it reduces... So here I'm using the 5 for the blind so that I can maybe get through the break bar a bit quicker, by the way. And now here we're using some other shouts we'll talk about in a second. But, you know, this high blind up time can stop him regenerating so much. But, yeah, it's really not a bad shout because of the chill application. Is essentially there's no animation on it. There's no travel time. There's no projectile to think about. There's... it's kind of a difficult thing for your opponents to dodge. But the real main value of this one does have a cast time for what it's worth and a slightly longer cooldown. But the main value is Frost Aura. Frost Aura is so strong. It reduces incoming damage that your allies are taking on top of other effects like protection or what Revenants might be offering or whatnot. So it's just a really fantastic thing to be able to throw out. Most Auramancers builds will run Flash Freeze just because Frost Aura is on it. And there's not really much more else to say. Very supportive. The packet of damage we kind of don't really care about. You'll also notice, by the way, that these shouts that provide auras, they do at AoE baseline. I shout this aura onto people, and that's that. I don't need to be water specialized for the Water Grandmaster that makes auras AoE. So for core elementalists and for weavers and whatever else, you need to take water to make stuff AoE. But for these shouts, at least, they are by default AoE. So it is possible to do a bit of that supportive stuff without going water at all. Some of the other auras available to Tempest aren't AoE by default, and you want to think about that. But yeah, that's something a lot of people don't realize. And no, if you are AoE sharing and using a shout, it doesn't double up. There's no double effect from that. There's no compounding effect. Bit sneaky of the devs to remove that, because pure logic, I think there should be a double effect, but there you go. So there you go. And next we got Aftershock. Call upon the earth to cripple and immobilize foes in the area around you. Allies in the initial blast gain a magnetic aura. So this one is your earth aura. You notice we've got fire, water, earth aura. And I won't demonstrate on these enemies here, but basically, yeah, we just shout, and there's this big explosion after a little bit of a delay, and we immobilize. And this is a really good thing to use to catch people in, say, your overload fire or whatnot. You saw me utilizing it a second ago to get through that break bar. Another really nice thing about this is that it's a blast. So, and because it's on a delay, the whole point is that you can press Aftershock and then overload fire, and it will blast in it afterwards. Like, you can play around with a skill order. So you could drop this and, you know, do some blasts here or whatever, and then Aftershock. Or you could do this other combo I was just talking about. As this cools down here, we're going to click this skill, then overload, and the blast is a second later, you see? And that can give you what other value you might be looking for. So Aftershock's very good because magnetic aura is so strong. The damage on this is pretty good. As a blast as well, the cooldown's even longer. So, you know, which aura you decide to go for can be a challenge. And actually, I genuinely think all of the shouts, the entire kit of utility skills on Tempest, is a really interesting challenge to decide which shout you use and which ones you drop. They're all really good. So you've noticed here we've got fire, water, earth, and often with Ellie it's fire, water, earth. And then there's the last element, that's air, right? They always kind of do that with the utility skills. At least until Weaver came out, and then things changed a little bit. So what about our air shouts? Does that mean we get shocking aura, the air aura? Well, the devs actually thought that was too strong, and I believe forever with Tempest, not even when Tempest originally came out, and it was likely to have been a little bit more overpowered, was this true. There's never been AoE shocking aura on a shout. They didn't do it. So instead, the air shout is this. It's called Eye of the Storm. Imbue your voice with the element of air, massively increasing and breaking stun for nearby allies. So this is a stun break, but it's an AoE stun break. So if you notice that your friend has just been knocked down by, you know, like a Deadeye's, what's their setup attack? Blinding something. Anyway, if you see that someone's been CC'd, you can pop this on them and they immediately stand up and they can dodge and they can run around as well at very high speed. That's all it does. AoE stun break and super speed on a pretty strong cooldown as well. There is no aura on there, so it's often harder to justify Eye of the Storm, but it can be pretty good. And it can be kind of hilarious for chasing down. If you want to be really greedy, you can sort of just throw this on fairly low mobility classes so they can hound something that they otherwise wouldn't, particularly if they're melee oriented. So, you know, picking which of them you go for it can be a challenge. It really can. And so there you go. That's the shouts. Then last of all, and you'll see how purely support focused this utility skill kit sets are really about. Lastly, we have the elite. So, again, I've had a lot of negative things to say about this elite in the past. It's been through multiple incarnations over the years. Here's what it is now. Shout and infuse your allies with arcane energy. So the word arcane there is the devs trying to say, oh, look, we've got all the elements and then the arcane element, you know, which is kind of the fifth line. And we think that the next elite specialization will probably be like an arcanist or something, right? It always seems to have made sense. So here's your arcane element shout. Allies who would take lethal damage while this is active ignore the death blow and are healed instead. If the effect expires naturally, grant an aura based on your current attunement. So this is actually a little bit broken and the wording is a little bit deceptive. First of all, this is any aura you want in the game. So this can be shocking aura. If I rebound while in air attunement, when the rebound ends out in 3, 2, 1, we give shocking aura. And we give that AoE to everyone we care about. So on a delay, we can give ourselves reflection as well. What I can do is rebound and then sand squall. And I'm reflecting, I'm reflecting, I'm reflecting, I'm reflecting, I'm reflecting. And then just as this ends, rebound ends. And I'm still reflecting, still reflecting, still reflecting. So that's kind of a fun thing you can do. So I actually, mechanically, I love this skill. I think it's a brilliant idea for an elite specialization based around support to have. The idea of splashing out a life save for your allies, giving them auras as well at the same time, straight up healing, it's brilliant. One of my favorite things to do in multiple formats of this game has been saving people's lives with rebounds, particularly when it comes to World versus World and PvE. You can power creep the hell out of this skill with benevolence and just raw healing power and like full heal people when they would die. For PvP, they're more careful about that. You can't power creep the healing and it's actually not that great, but it's good enough. And so the wording suggests that you only get the aura if it just runs out. But if it saves someone's life, you don't get the aura. That's not true. Even if this saves someone's life, it will still give them the aura. And then that aura can give them additional effects later. We're going to see a Grandmaster trait that means that auras can heal. Just spoilers. So you rebound, heal them, give them an aura, heal them again, all in the same instance that they would have instead died. And that aura can then cause them to reflect as they run away, or to stun around them as they run away, or give them damage reduction as they run away. The only aura that's not particularly defensive for that scenario is the fire one. So it's a really fun skill. The radius feels perfect. It's brilliant. The only complaints I've had about this in the past is, in earlier iterations, it felt pretty boring, but also it's the idea of this is like a violent storm elite specialization, and if you dreamt it could be a DPS-y thing, what is rebound? What's that got to do with storms? What's that got to do with anything, really? And the mechanics just felt very ill-suited to the flavor. So I still levy those criticisms, but in terms of actually utilizing the skill, not only is it one of my favorite Elementalist skills, it's one of my favorite skills in the entire game to use. And oh, the endorphin rush when you get it right and you save someone's life is brilliant. You enjoy playing supports? This is just about the most fun, pure support skill that exists in Guild Wars 2, I think. So yeah, really, really, really like it. Okay, so yeah, that's the skills. You can kind of see a lot of the ideas behind the class, all the animations that they built. Let's now run on into the traits, shall we? So I'd just like to point out that it's no coincidence in this video I'm Earth and Air. The way I'm running right now is actually Zealot stats, which is power, precision, and healing power. And I'm giving myself protection with every aura I deliver, which is a ton through the shouts and whatnot. So I have massive uptime on protection, fury, and swiftness for myself. I have loads of packets of damage, and I have loads of healing because of these Tempest traits. Basically, what you're looking at here is a really good open world PvE build, where you have plenty of CC, you have everything you could ever want, really. You just kill a little bit slower than some other builds. It's a really nice, fun, easy, comfortable way to go through, and it's a Tempest build. I'd actually rather run Dagger main hand, though, for what it's worth, than Scepter. I'm just on Scepter because I like Meteorologicus. Hey, sue me. All right, so yeah, let's look at the traits. First of all, we have Singularity. We now know all of that. Overload fire, water, air, earth, and you get the shouts and the Warhorn. The next minor is Speedy Conduit. This is just overloads grant swiftness. It's actually a really boring thing that is a cop-out of a minor, because they could have just built the swiftness baseline into the overloads, if that makes sense. Like how these are all baseline a break stun. In theory, this trait could read, oh, they break stun, like it's fake. It's a mirage, it's an illusion. It's to pretend that they made a minor when they didn't really. As for the actual effect of itself, it's pretty nice, to be honest. It is pretty easy and comfortable to, as you wander around the world, trigger Overload Earth and immediately cancel it. Walk to Air attunement, give yourself the Cyclone if you're on Warhorn, but remember, you might not necessarily be. And then when this overloads up, you start it and cancel cast it. And then as you're moving around, you start the next one and you cancel cast it. And through this, you have permanent swiftness because of the way that the overloads are made, and I guess we'll credit the minor. So Speedy Conduit. Next, you also get Hardy Conduit. Now, this does two different things. The first component is a cop-out, just like the swiftness is here. It's your overloads give you protection. So here you'll notice I get protection and swiftness just from going into the water. And then when it finishes, we get all the different things going on. But the protection is really kind of, it sort of needs to be there. As an Elementalist, you're light armor, you're the lowest vitality, you're one of the squishiest things in the entire game, and you're asking them to stand there doing these long cast times in vulnerable point-blank AoE scenarios. You gotta give them protection. And so, yeah, that's baked in. The other part of the trait, though, is kind of real. It's that protection grants increased damage reduction. So normally, this reduces your incoming damage by 33%, but instead, as a Tempest, protection on us goes another 7 higher. It's 40% reduced incoming damage. Now, that's really nice for our own sustain, but also when you think about this paired as a support specialization, isn't it a cool thought that while I'm overloading Earth, I'm pulsing protection around me, right? So if I stand next to someone while riving the Earth, I'm giving them protection that's stronger than anyone else can deliver. Isn't that really cool to think about? And here, you've got elemental shielding. Auras grant protection, so when I cast Feel the Burn, and remember, I don't need water attunement for this, it puts a fire aura on someone that gives them protection that's stronger than normal. That all sounds awesome, doesn't it? And you will get very high protection uptime as a Tempest. However, this, despite the wording, is not actually acting that way. The increased protection efficacy is only for you. It's a selfish thing. For a long time, I thought it was a selfless thing, and it's not. And if Tempest needs a little bit more of an edge over some of its other support competitors, I think that the devs should probably look at implementing that as a selfless thing. If I, as a Tempest, share out protection, I think it should be the stronger protection. But they don't quite do that. So bear that in mind. That might lead to some weird philosophical things in terms of my protection overlapping with other people's, and I don't want other people overwriting with mine, and I don't know, which we've sometimes butted heads with in the past. But yeah, just understand how that works. So that's your miners. Basically, you get to overload, and the overloads give you swiftness protection. There's not much to say. Let's actually look at what we get to choose. The first rung, we have Gale Song. This is cast Eye of the Storm when you are disabled. So disabled means if somebody, CCs me in any way, they knock me back, they knock me down, they float me, whatever. Eye of the Storm is this utility skill, which is a stun break, you'll notice. So basically, the idea of this is it's a trait you can pick up that gives you a free stun break whenever you'd like one. I don't know which of these enemies around here will try to stun me. I don't think any of these do. But yeah, you get CC'd and you instantly scream, Eye of the Storm, and you're standing up again and you have super speed. And that's got some value of its own. What's really cool about it, though, is it's Eye of the Storm. It's full-on Eye of the Storm. It's not lesser Eye of the Storm. It doesn't overwrite this cooldown as well, by the way, so you can run both of them if you really want. And what that means is that's AoE stun break. So if you're a support Tempest in a raiding scenario, sometimes it's actually an interesting idea, no word of a lie, to deliberately be CC'd against certain bosses if you don't have much confidence your allies will dodge it properly. Because when you get CC'd, if you don't land your dodge, you immediately stand back up, and everyone else who messed up their dodges also immediately stand back up. In theory, it's only 5 targets, so it's kind of RNG on whether that will work at all, and that's kind of a bit of a mess. The other thing as well is in competitive formats, this has a 90-second ICD now in an attempt to reduce passive gameplay, which I agree with, but kind of means I very rarely, if ever, care about it much in the game at the moment. But it's a fun idea for a trait. Next, we have Latent Stamina. Latent Stamina is an interesting trait in that, ever since Heart of Thorns and the Tempest came out, this has never, ever gone through a balance pass. Not once. It's never been touched. And that could mean it's super OP or super underpowered, or the devs think something about it that the community hasn't caught on to. Let's see what it is. Grant Vigor to nearby allies whenever you attune to water. So that's pretty simple. You see I go Water Attunement, I splash Vigor out. Vigor, by the way, is kind of a big thing of the class. I guess they feel that, it's the power of the vigorous winds or something that's healing people and helping them. I don't know, but you'll see a lot of Vigor. So we give Vigor, but also, whenever we give Vigor, it restores flat endurance to allies at the same time. So Vigor is about speeding up dodge speed, right? And that's fine. But now when and I'm going to give Vigor at the end of this overload here. Now when I give Vigor, it also just chunks me up straight away at the start, and then I get the increased thing as well. So if you have a ton of ways to splash out Vigor on a Tempest, you can also just kind of turbocharge people's dodge meters. Nobody's really ever played with it that much. I think there's a lot of potential with this trait, though, combined with Mirages of the Path of Fire specialization, who gain massive value off of their dodges. I really think that there's probably some kind of combo where you can have a Tempest supporting a Mirage and just allowing him to dodge and dodge and dodge, and Infinite Horizon and Infinite Horizon and Infinite Horizon, or whatever. If you don't know what I'm talking about, maybe check out my Introducing the Mirage video. So yeah, and this has never actually changed, and there is a lot of Vigor splash you'll see. There's weird things that buff this in strange ways. Like for Water Attunement, you get Vigor whenever you get a cantrip, and there's lots of passive cantrips around as well. Like Fire, you can get a passive cantrip, so you kind of get more dodge from stuff like that. But like this thing here with the Water Overload, this gives Vigor at the end of it now. That's a new patch, and I think whenever the devs do that, they're like subtly hoping people will look back at Latent Stamina, because now my Water Overloads provide endurance to everyone, flat after they're done. So yeah, we'll see what the devs do with this, and whether it's actually viable. But here's the final trait, and this is the really good one that overcrowds the other two in a major way, and is, I think, one of the reasons we don't see much Latent Stamina gameplay, and we don't see too much Gale Song, though they had a look in. It's Unstable Conduit. This is a beautiful trait, very powerful. Probably shouldn't be in the Adept slot, should probably be higher. Overloads grant an aura based on your attunement. Simple. So, when I overload water, at the end of the overload water, you will see I give myself Frost Aura, and then the Frost Aura gives me protection, and the Frost Aura gives me swiftness, and the Frost Aura gives me fury, and on and on and on and on. If I overload air, I give myself a Shocking Aura, which remember, we couldn't get on the shouts, but there is Shocking Aura here and on Rebound. Rebound's on a high cooldown, so you can't really consider it. But you do get regular access to Shocking Aura, even without a dagger equipped, just because of these air overloads. For Earth, you reflect at the end. For Fire, you get the Fire or the Fire Shield at the end. The thing to note about this, though, is unlike these other auras, this one that are bound to the shouts, this is selfish. If you want to share that out, you do need water. And because that by default is selfish, you do find a lot of Tempests in a pure support role do go water. I'm not running it here in PvE because I tend to run around alone and I don't need the AoE aspect of it. But this is really strong, and this is where you start to get really ludicrous uptime on various boons and stuff because you just get so many auras everywhere. This is now another 4 auras always available, not related to the weapons you're using or the utilities you're using. Very good. Next, Tempestuous Areas. So this is your shout trait. Usually a trait for a specific classification of utility skills or weapons or something, like drops the cooldown. The devs kind of move away from that. So here, this is shouts grant affected allies might and inflict affected enemies with weakness. This is a trait that I always try and make work and always like the idea of. The idea of splashing out tons of weakness while you're a support is kind of a good thing because weakness so massively reduces power pressure you take, and you're kind of vulnerable when you're so low vitality to that kind of stuff. So I like the idea, I always have, but the weakness is very short, and the might as well that you grant isn't really that compelling either. It's only 2 seconds of it. You get a lot of might splash elsewhere in the game. I think if the weakness duration was higher, or there was a little bit more access to shouts, it might be a bit better. I mean, here you can see I am putting weakness on this guy, and it will mean that I'm, you know, like, he's just doing 400 damage on a glancing blow. This guy, I'd probably even put weakness on. We can put weakness out on our heal and stuff. I do like the idea, the theory behind the trait. But again, it's competing with something really strong, so I think that's one of the big problems. I'm not going to grind through this whole fight here. Again, I'm not... by the way, I haven't actually played this build in PvE for a while. I know it still works and everything's fine. I'm just saying I don't know whether all my gear is correct and stuff, and certainly we don't have the right weapons on. So instead of just standing there grinding it for ages, let's just run away. So yeah, I like the idea. It's just not tuned very well compared to especially Invigorating Torrents. Auras you grant also grant regen and vigor. So remember latent stamina? Well, and remember our shout. So if I shout, I give aura. I give an aura and I give vigor, and the vigor gives endurance. And if I overload, I get an aura and I get regen and endurance. So now on this build, you'll see I'm getting swiftness, fury, protection, regen, and vigor. Pretty much a lot of the skills that I cast. And then once they're on there, I can Sand Squall and just bump their durations up to just really significant durations. Now here with Eye of the Storm, because it's not an aura, you don't necessarily get so much value. So that's another reason why you might not look at it too much. But yeah, this is such a strong trait. Really, really, really powerful. And finally down here, Harmonious Conduit, which thematically makes no sense for its effect, but bear with them. This was kind of a meta mainstay trait for most Tempests for a long time, because this is a damage boost. Gain stability when starting an overload. So first to just talk about that. Earth always gave us stability in an overload, right? Now you get even more in Earth. So you just get crazy stability in Earth. But now, when I'm air overloading, I get a stack of stability as well while I'm casting it. Why didn't I get that there? Oh, because I didn't click the trait. So that's really important because, you know, these long cast times, you can be vulnerable. If you're trying to do damage with overloads, with your fire tornado or whatever, you might get interrupted in the middle of it. So this stops you getting interrupted, right? With that one little bit of stab that's pulsing on there. And then also, it's when your overload ends, you get a few seconds of bonus damage, 10% damage. This has been nerfed several times. Its duration, its efficacy, its whatnot. The idea, though, is, you know, after an overload's finished, that's when your big damage starts chaining. So if I've cast Wildfire and now overload Fire, I don't have the damage boost. I don't have it. Now I have the damage boost, and I have 3 AoEs and the Lightning Orb going all at once. You see that there? All while under the effects of that crucial 5 seconds, yeah? Or 4 seconds as it now is. And yeah, so when Tempest was the only elite specialization, most DPS builds really revolved around this. Even some support builds used this because it felt so punishing to get interrupted in the middle of overload water and whatnot. Though you were giving up something pretty big and it always felt kind of bad. So yeah, that's Harmonious Conduit. Very viable for PvE as well, by the way. Personally, I like the Vigor and Regen, though, because it just gives you so much over time. And then finally, we've got the Grandmasters. ArenaNet these days are really good at designing Grandmasters that have got interesting ideas, and, you know, you might swap around. Tempest Grandmasters, I have to be honest, I think are really boring and not very well implemented, because one is just way stronger than the other in general, and you're often not going to go out. So first of all, we have a supportive Grandmaster called Imbued Melodies. We gain increased concentration while wielding a Warhorn, and that's nice. Concentration gives us boon duration. Warhorn is what's pumping out a ton of might and fury and has Sand Squall, okay? So, you know, there's some synergy there, definitely. But also, whether you have a Warhorn or not, there's also this effect that when you are struck below 90% health, you automatically cast Sand Squall. So even if I have a focus on my offhand, if somebody hits me and puts my health down just a little bit, I just free cast Sand Squall, which extends whatever boons I already have. It's a nice idea. It gives me Magnetic Aura, it gives me the Blast, it gives me protection, but you kind of want to Sand Squall at a precise time, I would say. And at the very beginning of a fight, when this is going to proc, because the threshold is 90%, you might not have that many boons that are ready to be bounced at the very beginning of a fight, so it can kind of whiff when it casts. It does provide you this thing where very early you just start automatically reflecting, which is cool, but one of the recent rune overhauls gave you that on Rune of Earth anyway. I like the idea. It's another AoE aura, which you could get all these other values out of. You know, that can be AoE even without being in water. But it just doesn't feel quite there. I don't know. I've always liked the idea of trying it out, but I've never really been enamored with it. Some people have played it at various points in various formats. Next, you have Lucid Singularity. And this has got a really cool idea behind it. Overloads remove movement impairing conditions and reduce the duration of incoming ones. So the way it's got it phrased there might not sound that good, but the reduction is 100%. So what this means is while I'm on my Earth, right, and I have Stab, I'm immune to anything that would slow me down. I can't get them applied to me. I insta-cleanse, immobilize and cripple and chill, and then they cannot be reapplied. So I just can flee. Now that's a cool idea. But the overloads don't necessarily have that long cast time, so you can't hold that immunity for that long. You are more likely to just want to cleanse in a lot of ways. And I don't know, maybe on a DPS build it's kind of a fun idea, maybe. But let's talk about the king of these Grandmasters. It's Elemental Bastion. Look at how crazy this is. It's 2 different traits in one, first of all, which is funny to see the devs do since they copped out on these miners. But check this out. First effect. Heal allies you grant an aura to. Now, to me, that is a water magic trait. It should be a part of Core Ellie, but it's Tempest and Auramancer and whatever. So anything I can do now that would aura is now healing. And that's where so much of the healing starts coming from, in addition to Wash the Pain Away and, you know, your regular water skills and whatnot. I can cast Feel the Burn and... Oh, we do have it on. And it will heal people when we cast this. I can cast Flash Freeze and I will heal people. And I can cast Aftershock at the end of my overloads. Even a fire overload that wouldn't normally heal now heals. If I'm on a focus offhand, I can just press fire aura and that heals. Myself as well as my allies. So even if you're on kind of a selfish build, this is often a great thing to take. That alone, that first line, is a trait all on its own that I think deserves to be in water. But let's go even further. Grant Frost Aura to nearby allies when struck while below the threshold. So here's another aura that again is baseline AoE. And it's just like up here. You can either get a Sand Squall and an Earth Aura when you get below 90% health. Or you can get a Frost Aura when you're below 75% health. And that will share out to everyone. And because it's tied to the healing trait, it will auto heal. And if you take like this trait up here, it will automatically apply protection, and it will do this and this and this and this, which just makes you really rounds you out, makes you very sustaining in selfish scenarios, more sustaining in selfish scenarios. But if you're playing a full-on support, I mean, this is everything. You kind of don't have a choice. You have to make your auras heal, really. So there's a bit of a problem here, I think, in that what this seeks to be is a fun idea, but doesn't have much of a mechanical place. And what this seeks to be is kind of a support thing, but is way worse than this support thing. They're not like defined different angles necessarily. So yeah, I'm not a big fan of the Grandmaster juxtapositions, but there you have it. It's a very cool elite specialization. I'll round out this video by just saying, now that we've seen every little bit, this is probably the elite specialization I spent more time playing than anything else, just because my hours of game time during the Heart of Thorns expansion was so high, and very often they were on this class. It's a really cool elite spec that has a lot of value on staff builds, on scepter builds, on dagger builds. The Warhorn itself has some application. And I think it will be relevant for years to come. The devs still do dedicated balance towards it. When you think support on an Elementalist, it looks towards Tempest, and it looks to auras, and this is how it hopes to do it. So hopefully you guys learned a little something. You know, even if there was one little insight here you'd forgotten about of Tempest or you didn't know and now you've reconsidered, I'm glad to have given it to you. And yeah, that's introducing the first Elementalist elite specialization. We're now done with the light armors, so we'll be moving on the next episode to either heavy or medium. You guys can say in the comments which one you'd rather see. I'd be very keen to hear. And until then, see you next time.